Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Yud, Amud Aleph, by the Mishnah on the bottom of the Amud, 7 lines up from the bottom of the page. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya. They should have full recovery, Refuah Shelema. Also has been dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Nisim Ben Miriam, and for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, should have full recovery, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, Dayan family, and Kohen families. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot. Amen. Okay, so we're starting a new Mishnah, very much aligned with the concepts that we started in the previous Gemara of what happens if you have something in addition with your schach. So last discussion was when you have sukkah tachat sukkah, you have a sukkah under another sukkah, whether it's going to be kasher, how high it is, what the type of schach you have. Here we're going to have the decoration and design of the sukkah, which is going to be accompanying the schach of the sukkah, or just simply wanting to sleep in a kila when you have, let's say, a net around you to keep away the creatures that may be bothering you in the sukkah while sleeping. All of that's going to be discussed in this Gemara. So says the Mishnah, Pires aleha sadin mipenei hachama, if you spread a sheet on top of your schach in order to create more shade, make it cooler, nicer, more shady, or if you put it beneath the schach to catch the falls of the leaves and other things that may be falling from the schach into your food, into your bed, or that you have one of these fancy beds that they have a beam protruding from every corner of the bed. You know, you have these 4 things like a king's bed, and you cover that with a sheet that you're sleeping on beneath this, underneath the schach. All of that together, all of that is pasul, says the Gemara. Psula, because you're not sleeping under the schach, you're not living under the schach. You have something that is dividing between you and between the schach, or is making the schach pasul by being on top of the schach as a sheet spread on top. So says the Gemara, but you have a case that it could be kasher. Aval pores hu al gabe naklite hamita. Whereas you can't have this 4 poles that you spread a sheet on top of all of them, and now you're sleeping beneath it. That's pasul. But you have one scenario that it could be kasher, and that's naklite hamita. Naklite hamita is, instead of having 4 poles from the corners of the bed, you have only two poles from the middle of the bed, from 2 sides, from the head side and the foot side. And these 2 go up, and you have a horizontal beam that goes between the 2 poles, and you have a sheet spread on top of them coming down like a tent. That would be kasher. Now, we will see the qualifications of this heter in the Gemara. Is it kasher in every case, or does it have to be a certain height and certain width for it to be kasher? So says the Mishnah, you have a difference between the type of sheet that is separating between you and the sukkah. Some of them could be kasher, some of them could be pasul. So if you have a bed with 4 posts, and then you cover the top, like those fancy beds that you see nowadays sometimes, that would be pasul. If you have, however, just 2 beams and a pole between them, and the cover comes down, ending in a point on top, in a narrow point, that would be kasher. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda, lo shanu ela mipnei hanesher. This that we say, if you cover the entire schach, beneath the schach, with a sheet to catch the falling leaves, it's pasul. It's only when you do it to catch the leaves from falling. But how about if I have a beautiful sheet? For design, for decoration, I want to have this shears or the material that is beautiful, and I want to spread it beneath the schach, not for catching anything, but for beauty. So says the Gemara, Rav Chisda said that is kasher. Aval lenaota kshera. For beautifying the sukkah, it is kasher, even though that it also could catch the falling leaves, but that's not the point that I'm putting it there. It's a beautiful piece of art. I'm putting it there to beautify my sukkah. That's kasher. Mara says, pshita, that's pashut. Mipnei hanesher tenan. We learn in the Mishnah, mipnei hanesher, only when you're putting it, spreading it beneath the schach to catch the leaves. That's pasul. So I would have known that for beautifying the sukkah, it should be kasher. So says the Gemara, no, mahu de tema hu adin da afilu renaota. I would have thought, really, what's the difference? If you are dividing between yourself and between the schach, what's the difference if it's for catching the leaves or for beautifying? It's pasul. Why does the Mishnah say to catch the leaves? It's because that's what normally people do. Most people who would spread something beneath the schach is for catching the things that would be falling into their sukkah. So therefore the Mishnah, I would have thought there's no difference between beautifying and between catching leaves. Therefore, Rav Chisda has to say, you should know it's only for catching things that is pasul. But for beautifying, no sukkah has its own halachot. If you're doing something to beautify your sukkah, that does not create a hefsek. In this case, it would be mutar. And by the way, that's the halacha, right? If you have something beautiful that you want to spread beneath the schach, technically speaking, that would be kasher. You know, we have to still discuss the details of how close to the schach it has to be, and so on. But says the Gemara, it's teaching you, Rav Chisda, that you could spread a sheet for beautifying the sukkah, even though that it is covering the entire surface of the schach from underneath. So says the Gemara, Lema mesayale schacha keilchata ve'iterah bekramin ubesadinin. Let us bring a proof from a Gemara that is mentioned multiple times in Shas. You'll be surprised. This is mentioned in Masechet Betzah, in Masechet Shabbat more than once. But it's not really mentioned in Masechet Sukkah anywhere besides this. And the reason for it is because it's discussing the halachot of muktzeh, right? So halachot muktzeh are found in Masechet Betzah, Masechet Shabbat, right? And this is in Perek Kira, in Daf Mem Dalet. That's where the Gemara throws this in. But speaking about Sukkah and its items that we put there for beautifying the Sukkah. So says the writer, if you put schach of your Sukkah beautiful, nice, and then afterwards you put items to beautify the Sukkah. You put this beautiful sheets that are work of art, that they're woven nicely and pictures on them and so on and so forth. V'talaba egozin, and then you put different types of nuts. Shekedim, afarsekin, you put fruits, rimonim, pomegranates, parchile anavim, clusters of grape. Ve'atarot shel shibolim, right? You have all kinds of sheva aminim over there. Yenot, shmanim, oil and wine, slatot. This is what they used to do, right? So remember, because minhag in many kehilot, that any fruit and grain that's available at the time, they'll somehow make it to the sukkah as a noy sukkah hanging somewhere. somehow. So says the Gemara, asur listapek mehen, you cannot use them. They become muktzeh ad motzei Yom Tov, until motzei Yom Tov. In other words, once the Yom Tov hits, imagine in the middle of the Yom Tov, you really crave a pomegranate, you want to just take and have, can't do it. It's muktzeh, right? If it falls down by itself, can I have tfel? Can I eat it? No, you can't. Muktzeh, right? That's the halacha. When you dedicate something to Noi Sukkah, it becomes muktzeh, unless, of course, says the Gemara, and this is until the end of Chag HaSukkot, until Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. Ve'im hitna aleim hakol lefi tana. But if you made the Tanah, you made a condition from the beginning, you said, look, I'm putting this on, but I want to be able to pick some pomegranates and eat in the middle of the Chag. I'm not saying that this should be here for the entirety of the Chag. Then, hakol lefi tana, you of course are able to make a condition of such nature, and then you would be allowed to take it whenever you want, or if it falls, it will no longer be muktzeh, you could use it. Now we understand why this is in Masechet Betzah and Masechet Shabbat, because it's halachot of muktzeh, but it's of course very much regarding Chag HaSukkot. And you realize that the very beginning of the Braita started with decorating your sukkah with garments and sheets that are beautifully designed with pictures and so on. Right? So this Braita sounds to say that you could spread a nice, beautiful sardine, a nice, beautiful sheet beneath the schach of your sukkah as a decoration. So says the Gemara, let us bring a proof from this Braita that's mentioned in Masechet Sukkah and Betzah for our halacha of Rav Chisda, that you can indeed spread a nice, beautiful sheet to beautify your sukkah, which would be very important because we don't have a Mishnah or Tanaic work that says this clearly. All we have is Rav Chisda looks at our Mishnah that says you can't put a sheet for catching leaves, and he says, well, it's only for catching leaves, but for beautifying sukkah it's mutar. That's all we have. So it would be beautiful to have a Tanaic work, a source from Tanaim in the Braita Masechet Betzah and Sukkah that would actually explicitly say that you could put this beautiful garments and sheets beneath your schach, right? It would be invaluable to have that proof. Mara says, don't get too excited, because guess how you could do Noi Sukkah? Who says that this is spreading horizontally beneath your schach? Maybe it is hanging off the walls of the sukkah. That will also be muktzeh if you have walls of sukkah. And the Persian custom actually was very strong, that they had beautiful silk carpets, very expensive items, very, very expensive items that were actually, many of them were made for Chag HaSukkot. They had sukkah stuff on them. You're talking about like very expensive things, and that was the walls, of the sukkah. Not actually the walls. I mean, you had walls, and that was the cover of beautifying cover of the walls of the sukkah. So says the Gemara, Dilma min atzad. Who says that we're talking about a scenario in which you have the sedinin hanging beneath the sukkah, like our case before? Maybe it's talking about minatzat from the sides, and therefore that would not be a proof. So as beautiful as it is, this Braita in Masechet Shabbat and Betzah, we learn a lot of Hilchot Muktzeh from it, but there's nothing really to learn as far as our sugya is concerned. Says the Gemara, Itmar, Noi Sukkah ein mematin besukkah. We learned in the previous Mishnayot that the minimum height necessary for sukkah is how much? 10 tfachim, right? The minimum height necessary for sukkah is 10 tfachim. Let's call it 39 inches. And if you even have a schach protruding down, it will be, diras rucha, it would be not nice. So the question would beg, how about if I have this paper chains and the beautiful things that the kids make? No sukkah. I don't have schach coming down, but I have the beautiful things that are there for decoration of sukkah. hanging down a few inches, is that also going to be pasul now? Because I don't have the minimum height of sukkah any longer? Says the Gemara, no. No sukkah en mimatin besukkah. Something that is for beautifying does not bother anybody, right? It's not a diras rucha. You have a nice schach, nice, beautiful, minimalistic sukkah, right? We mentioned that many people in the war in this past sukkah actually did this. They had small, very shallow sukkahs, the minimum necessary in order to be able to just be yotzeh, taking cover and not sticking out, being too visible. But says the Gemara, the noise sukkah is not mema'it. Amar of Ashi, uminatzad mematin. We learned that the minimum size of sukkah from the sides, it's 7 by 7 tfachim, right? It's machlokes Beit Hillel Bet Shammai. A 7 by 7 tfachim needs to fit your body, rosho verubo veshulchano. So therefore, says the Gemara, there, when we talk about the sides, if you have no sukkah that's sticking out, then it's going to be memayet, because the walls are the walls. Even if the walls are made out of no sukkah, they're still walls, and therefore, if they take up some of the area that now you can't fit inside, that would be memayet. Says the Gemara, Menimin avdeh de Rav Ashi, the servant of Rav Ashi, his name was Menimin, and it mishale ketunta b'maya. His garment, his coat, fell into water, and it got wet. He wants to dry it. You know what's the best way to dry it? In the sun. And he looked around, he saw there's a sukkah there. So he just dropped it on top of the sukkah to dry in the sun. So comes Rav Ashi, he spread it on top of the sukkah. Amar le Rav Ashi tells his Eved, Daile delo limru kamesachki bedavara mekabel tuma. Says take it off, that people should not think that you could make a schach with a coat. What's the problem making a schach with a coat? Well, we haven't really discussed this. We're going to get to those sugyas at length, but generally speaking, an item that's mekabel tumah you can't use for sukkah, right? Many times people may not realize this. For instance, imagine you have something that is made out of wood. Wood is kasher, right? And then you're putting, for instance, like the sides of your kid's bed, with the rails and this, you just dump it there to put schach on top and whatnot. That would be pasul. The whole thing is wood, and it's nice, narrow pieces of wood, but it's mekabel tumah because it's a kli, it's a vessel. And a vessel is mekabel tumah. You cannot do that, right? You could make walls with it, but you cannot make a schach. Schach cannot be mekabel tumah. This, by the way, becomes a platform for the question of the bamboo mats that are attached together with pieces of this is not something that is very prevalent now in the United States, but it used to be about 40 years ago, 50 years ago for sure. The normal bamboo mats, the shades that you got, the two sides of it were attached with a garment. You actually had a piece of fabric from two sides that attached it, right? I see those who are older than 95, they're nodding their head, right? That used to be the normal bamboo mats, right? Nowadays, the question would be with the metal strings that some still use, and if the metal string is considered mekabel tumah, which is a very big question, then the whole thing in attachments of stitching the things together would be mekabel tumah, and that would become a question for the entire bamboo mat would become a question, right? Or bamboo mats that are made in parts of the world that are made for sitting on them, sleeping on them, right? A bamboo mat that is made for sleeping on it or sitting on it is mekabel tumah. And therefore, if you took it and put it on top of bamboo, everyone does bamboo mats, right? That would be completely pasul because it's mekabel tumah, right? So this is a sugya again that we're going to get into as our Gemara develops. But nevertheless, here we just pull this in because Rav Ashi is telling his Eved, he says, well, people are going to see this as Marit Ayin. They're going to say Rav Ashi's household had a coat on for Sukkah, and that would be a problem. So now his Eved is going to have a whole shackle of a tarya with him. They're going to discuss this halakha. He says, wait a second. This is dripping wet. People who are going to see it from far, they're going to see this is wet. They know that we put it here not for schach, but for drying it out in the sun. No problem. So it says, Gemara, Rabash told him, yes, no problem with that. I'm telling you, when it dries, right away take it off because you don't want it to be there and people get the wrong idea. Itmar, we learned. Noi Sukkah hamuflagin mimena arba'a Rav Nachman Amar Kshera, Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Amri Psula. Now this is something very relevant when you have a Noi Sukkah. How far from the schach can it be, right? We spoke about this sheet of beautifying the Sukkah, right? You remember a few minutes ago we said you have to know how close to the schach it has to be, or your regular Noi Sukkah. You have this beautiful glitzy things that you buy from the stores, and they're big, and you want to put it under the sukkah, the fancy paper chains that you buy, all right? All kinds of different decorations of the sukkah that you have, or you want to put a chandelier inside the sukkah, and so on. How far from the schach can it be? So there's a massive machloket amoraim, whether it could be farther from 4 tfachim, or does it have to be within 4 tfachim? Right? Does it have to? Yeah. Erev Sukkot this past year, someone sent me the picture of their sukkah. Beautiful. They were so proud of it. Like really big, nice sukkah with a lot of decorations. And I was like, measure the decorations because it seems like they're farther from schach, farther than 4 tfachim. And poor guy was there until 2:30 a.m. taking everything off and putting back everything on again. So the credit to him. But nevertheless, this is something that's discussed mamash here of Daf Yud Amud Bet fame in Masechet Sukkah.
So it's 4 tfachim? It can be up to 4 tfachim?
Yes. So says the Gemara. Here it is. This is Machloket Amoraim, right? Itmar, Noi Sukkah muflakin mimena arba'a. If it's 4 tfachim away from the schach, Rab Nachman says, Kshera, it's no problem, fine. Rav Chisda, Rabba, Barav Huna Amri Psula. Right? Remember these names. This is Rav Chisda and Rabba, the son of Rav Huna. They hold this pasul, and that's the halacha. That's how Rambam passes, that's how Shulchan Aruch passes. Rav Chisda, now this is a very strange story. These two people, Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, ikleu leberesh galuta. They were on travel, and they stayed the night on Chag Sukkot with the Resh Galuta. Well, who was the Resh Galuta? Resh Galuta was an appointee of the government as the Jewish governor, right? It was like a Jewish governor. It had power of even judicial power of its own within the Jewish communities. And sometimes, as we have discussed this in previous Masechtas, sometimes the household of Resh Galuta was a very dangerous team of people because they could kill people. Nobody would say boo to them. And, power could be very corruptive. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Okay. So this is always has been a problem. Sometimes the Resh Galuta was more of a Talmid Chacham himself, and therefore it was very good for the Jews. Sometimes the Resh Galuta was not necessarily that frum, and it was a trouble. His household was a trouble. Now, here, they're sleeping by the sukkah of the Resh Galuta, of the Jewish governor, and Agninu Rav Nachman besukkah shenoya muflagin mimena arba'at tfachim. Rav Nachman is calling the shots here. Why is he calling the shots in Resh Galuta? Because the Gemara says he had them sleep in his sukkah that he had decorated, and of course all the designs of the sukkah, all these decorations were hanging low, below 4 tfachim from the schach. And it said, B'chavod, chachamim, sleep in this sukkah, right? Why is Rab Nachman having a say here? Because as Rashi brings here, Rab Nachman married the daughter of Resh Galuta. Rab Nachman was a very powerful personality. Yalata, because the wife of Rab Nachman, it was a very strong personality. You see this in multiple places, especially in Masechet Kiddushin. There's a whole story with him and his wife, and so on. Masechet Chulin, you see a lot of stories about Rab Nachman and his wife, but he married into the Resh Galuta's family, and he was the Av Bedin also. So in both sides, he was a very influential, powerful individual, and that's why he's there, because this is his father-in-law's house. And he built the sukkah. So he says, now this whole thing is a very interesting phenomenon, because the Gemara has in Masechet Chulin, of Kuf Hey, Kuf Yud, Gemara has a story of a machloket between Rav and Shmuel in the halachot of kashrut. What is considered kasher, what is not considered kasher. And there, one of them hosts the other one, and there was a question. His student says, maybe he fed you what you think is asur, right? And Shmuel says, no. He would have never given me something that I don't believe it is kasher without telling me, right? Now, if you tell him, that's a different story, right? Which is here. He's showing them. You can see everything is there for you to see. But if you're not telling him, that would be a completely different story. What says in Masechet Yevamot also, on Daf Yud Gimal, that Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, they had very sharp disagreements in one area of halacha of Sarat Erva, when it comes to halachot of Yibum, and there are cases that according to Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, their machloket would involve Isurei Karet. The highest form of Isur would be mutar for the other, according to opinion of the other. And the Gemara says, even though that they had this sharp disagreements, they still married from each other's families, because they were very open, telling this according to you is Asur, you cannot marry this person, right? They were very transparent, respecting the other person's opinions in halacha. Here is a very interesting case, because he is actually enforcing his own shita that he holds, that is kasher, Rab Nachman, but it's at the same time not something that they can't see. They could see what it is, right? So maybe they could take it off and put it back on in a different place, or go sleep somewhere that is not necessarily covered with no sukkah. Be that as it may, says the Gemara, they went to sleep like babies. They didn't say a word, right? Ashtiku v'lo amru leh v'lo midi. They didn't say a word to him. They didn't say, why he's putting us here. They didn't change the schach. Nothing. They just used the sukkah as is. Amar lehu, afterwards in the morning he comes, he says, Hadur bu Rabbanan mishmatayu. Must be that you were choser. You retracted your psak. Now you agree with me that no sukkah could be hanging lower than 4 amod, right? They say no. They gave him the ultimate, 4 tfachim, right? They gave him the ultimate answer. They say, Amru leh. Say no. Anan shluchei mitzvah anan. Upturin min sukkah. Says, we are shaliach mitzvah. And shluchei mitzvah, there's a halacha about them that when they're traveling, they don't have to drive themselves crazy to find a kosher sukkah. They could sleep wherever they could sleep, right? They don't even have to be in the sukkah. So they basically said, well, your sukkah is not the sukkah, but we can sleep outside the sukkah. So therefore, no problems there. That's why we didn't say anything. Not because this is a good sukkah, but because we don't need a good sukkah. We are on travel mode, and in travel mode, you don't have to go out of your way. This is a platform for tremendous rate bites of what is considered shluchei mitzvah, what is considered being on the way. Can I also not sleep in the sukkah when I'm traveling with my family for a berazmanim trip that I didn't have to do. I'm just going to wherever I'm going, or I'm going to a park for the kids and I'm eating out. Can I do that? Or is it only for shluchei mitzvah? What is exactly the hagdara of this Gemara? It's something that we have to discuss. Bezrat Hashem in a rate bite, which is going to be very gishmak. But says the Gemara, they were patur from the sukkah. They said, and hence the halacha still stays, as we discussed it before, that no sukkah has to be hanging within the 4 tfachim of the schach and not lower than that. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, says the Gemara, Mutar li shan bekila besukkah, afal pi sheyesh la gag, vehu she'ena gevoha asara. So what's the halacha that Shmuel is saying? You could sleep in a kila, which is basically the same thing we spoke about in our Mishnah, that you have a bed and the bed has a roof, right? Now, instead of having a whole curtain hanging down, as we discussed before, this is a bed that has 4 posts and a roof on top of the posts. And says Shmuel, you could sleep under that in the sukkah, provided that it is not high. Provided, says the Gemara vehu she'ena gevoha asara, that it is lower than 10 tfachim high. Because when it's lower than 10 tfachim high, it is not considered its own tent. It's not considered its own entity. It is nullified to the sukkah. And therefore, when you're sleeping under this roofing, so to speak, of your bed, that roofing is not considered a roofing, and you're good to go. Now, this obviously already alerts us, because we just learned that the same exact case is going to be pasul. And now Shmuel is saying that this is going to be kasher. Tashma yashen b'kila b'sukkah lo yatzai dechovatos. Wait a second. We learned that a person that sleeps in a kila under the sukkah, he is not yatzei yochovah. It's as if he's sleeping outside sukkah. And the Gemara says, no. Hacha b'may askinan k'shkuvaha asara. We're talking about the case that kila is higher than 10 tfachim tall. And the Gemara is going to do this with a number of examples. In other words, the Gemara is going to go through everything we know about sleeping under anything in the sukkah and say, how about this? How about this? How about this? And on all of them, the Gemara tries to say, well, no, they're all talking about when it's higher than 10. But when it's lower than 10, you can sleep on it, under it, and then the Gemara is going to actually finalize the questions to see if we find a question that we can't answer, and we'll see the fascinating halakha that comes out of this Bezrat Hashem tomorrow morning. Chazak Baruch.